Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is February 11th, 2015. This webinar is an old webinar. I've done it twice in the past 5 years and haven't done it for 4 years. And I wanted to do it because I think it is such a foundational piece. And a lot of parents don't watch and go through all of the old archives to read them, or excuse me, to look at them. And I thought I could also bring something new to it since I haven't done it in 5 years. And so it really is the foundation of our program, the I feel statement and the communication, teaching, education that we do for our clients, students, and our parents. And I want to start off and be clear with one thing, like all parenting skills and tools. And this is maybe most important with this one. The goal in teaching parents about communication is to change parents, not children. Communication skills, healthy communication skills, can have a wonderful impact on your children if you utilize them and know them and practice them. They absolutely can. But more important, far more important, is the impact that communication skills practice has on the person practicing, has on the person participating in it. It changes the way you think about others. It changes the way you think about your relationship to others. It changes the way you think about the insides of you. It changes the way you look at the relationship between your feelings, your thoughts, your perceptions, and a somewhat disciplined adherence to healthy communication skills requires you to think in different ways and really challenges you. That's one thing that I think about often is the my commitment that I try to make in my life, both professionally and personally, to my intentional use of language and how it's hard to do some of the same things in relationships and to myself if I'm using it's possible and I at times have mastered it, but it's hard to do some certain unhealthy things if I practice healthy communication. So the first thing that's important to understand as an overarching principle when we talk about communication is the concept of metacommunication. Metacommunication is what the meaning of communication is. And I think we can all relate to, especially in our families, someone saying something to us and us knowing from the context, from the history, from the nonverbal, knowing that they mean something else. And sometimes that's a misinterpretation on our part, but often we know what it feels like when somebody says something. And if we were to see that those words on paper and type outside of the context and the history and the relationship, it would mean something entirely different to us. So metacommunication is that concept of really understanding the meaning of communication. As therapists, it's probably the first thing that we learn in our training is to understand the difference between process and content. And it is so easy to get stuck on content. It is so easy to say, that's not what I said. Those aren't the words that I used. And I think one of the things that I get a lot of joy out of is watching students, clients, and parents first encounter having the experience of recognizing that the words that they were using or that were being used with them, that there was a meaning that was when they had a 10,000 foot perspective, much more clear and much more added much more insight into why some of the problems were existing in their relationship. Um, there's this concept that communication is this tool to unlock some of our pathology or to move out of it, right? Pathology, in a very broad sense, could be understood to mean that it's the feelings and our solutions to the feelings. And communication, healthy communication, it's a healthy tool. Parents always ask, what are the tools you're offering my child? And one of them is the ability to talk about their feelings. That is an avenue that doesn't necessarily have any symptoms associated with it. It's really, I always say that if we could just say to people, feel, and they could feel, that would work. If that worked, that would work. But instead of that, we say, let's talk about it. Let's hear about it. And through talking about it, it's the closest directive that we have as therapists to ask somebody to feel something. So we're teaching people how to feel. Pathology, addictions, neuroses, and symptomology very often have their roots in the unexpressed emotional pain of the individual. And one thing that happens as we engage in this process more as professionals and parents, as we start to hear what people aren't saying, and I can see my own progress in the 20 years that I've been doing it, and even in the last few years, being able to say, okay, this thing that my family or my client is expressing that is triggering me, it's just a wound. They're just hurt. And they don't have either the willingness or the tools or the awareness to express it that way. So I can't, I have to run it through in my case, my clinical filter, if it's in my family, through my adult filter. And if I can do that, it's easy and effortless to hear it. If I can't do that because of my own triggers and my own trauma, then I'm going to have a limited capacity, a limited range of reactions with that person that is not going to be intentional. So, Carl Jung, one of my favorite quotes and one of my favorite therapists ever, said that neuroses is a substitute form of legitimate suffering. We use communication theory to help equip individuals and families with a tool that facilitates feeling, healing, and integration. The feeling statement is an avenue to feel, connect, choose, and change. So even the specific I feel statement that I'm going to share tonight, I'm going to go a lot into theory because you can practice this at home, you can practice it when you come out to the program, but I want you to understand how intentional every single word of our version of the I feel statement is and why we chose it and why we didn't choose something else. So I'll talk about that today. Because again, when I use an I feel statement and I use it correctly, I use the appropriate language, and I'm somewhat connected to the choice that I'm making with my language, I start to become more accountable. I start to become more aware. I start to take more ownership of my feelings instead of blaming it on somebody else. I start to feel empowered. I start to recognize that I have choice, even though it might be difficult because of my emotions to choose it. I become aware of it, and even if I'm in a hole at that moment or that day or that week or that month, even if I'm in a hole, the recognition that I got myself in that hole, that nobody shoved me into it, is really, really empowering, even at those low points. So everything is extraordinarily intentional. I'll introduce you very briefly to a couple of models which have their own webinar, and it's listed down there. The wellness cycle, or the cycle of health and healing, and the shame cycle. Just to give you some other contexts for, and at the end of the webinar tonight, I'll talk about a couple of other family therapy theories to give you, to put this tool in a context. Like I always say, a tool is only as good as its context. In other words, you can take a hammer and it can be a deadly weapon, or it can be a tool to put nails in wood or in something else and to build a house. So the hammer has no intrinsic badness or goodness to it, but it's only in the context of how it's used, who's using it, what's the goal, that it then takes on those qualities. So we'll talk about all of these things to give it context. So the cycle of health and wholeness, this is a cycle that describes very, very simply, and I won't go into it because it's not the whole webinar, this idea that we have experiences that we desire that bring us joy and emotions that we desire, right? Positive emotions. This is probably going to be pretty small to read because it's out of a book, but it brings up emotions that we want and desire. And then there are undesired experiences which are going to occur at the hands of life or ourselves sometimes, or they're going to come intentionally, those experiences intentionally to us or unintentionally to us. And when that happens, then we have undesired emotions. And then this becomes the crisis moment. And it can be small or big, it can turn into a pattern. But we either choose to feel it and sit with it and talk about it and experience it. And I don't like this word a lot, but suffer through it. Or we mask it with symptoms. Essentially, we mask it with disordered, like it says on the outside of the circle, disordered eating, lying, sexual promiscuity, dangerous or risky behaviors, self-injury, stealing, school refusal, all those on the outside. Those become our ways of inauthentically feeling. And even though all of those things seem to have their own discomfort to them, bring their own discomfort with them, it still feels better than the raw feeling of sadness, loneliness, fear, hurt, anger, those things. Right? Those things then become masked by this less authentic way of feeling. And then we have the opportunity, and in our case, in our program, it comes through therapy and talking about it or writing about it, we have the opportunity to tell our story. And through that process, through that engagement with that safe container, we learn to feel. And there's a sense of integration and wholeness. You know, Joseph Campbell said that this desire for people to find meaning in their life is just really the search for being alive. And we can learn to embrace and appreciate even our sadness, even our pain, because we know that it's connected to our joy and our happiness and our love. And we can get to that point. And even when horrible things occur in our lives, we can still maintain some sense of integration and wholeness because we can see all of that. So that's the cycle, and this happens, like I said, in large cycles in our life and in immediate day-to-day cycles in our life. The other cycle, to give you some context, is the shame cycle, and I'll run through this very quickly. Again, there's a webinar in the our library that talks about the wellness cycle and the same cycle for the whole hour. But basically, this is our children. They have the capacity to read other people. This is what also allows them to be manipulative, because they can read, tell you what you want. They know how to do it. It's intuitive. It's not often conscious, but it can be conscious. So they have to have a sensitivity, an empathy, or perceptibility to begin with. And then they try to get their needs by meeting other people's needs. I'm going to make myself feel good by having you love me, like me, be proud of me, be excited for me. So I'm going to perform for you. I'm going to give you what you want. You tell me what you don't like, I don't do it. You tell me what you like, I do it. And in that process, I don't really authentically take care of my own needs. I don't learn how to self-soothe. I don't learn how to feed myself emotionally. I don't learn how to do those things. So my needs are repressed. And in fact, psychologically speaking, I do this thing called splitting, where I split off those parts of myself and hide them in the closet or under the bed, where they mutate and become a problem and show up in the symptoms that your children have. So those symptoms that they have are these mutated form of needs, right? These are their, as we say, best attempt to get their needs met. They're unhealthy coping to meet a healthy need. So I repress those needs. I get those met through maladaptive symptoms, and then I start to have this belief, and it might be conscious and it might be unconscious, that I'm doing this for you. I'm playing soccer for you, Dad. And Dad says, "What are you talking about? I just wanted you to be happy. I thought you liked it. You said you liked it." And so when they say, I got good grades for you, you want me to be something I'm not. I played soccer because you liked it. I did this or that because you liked it. And the parent says, I have no conscious awareness of that pressure at all. But what the child is doing in this case is saying, I saw you smile. I saw you happy. I heard you tell me you were proud when. And I now believe that you are forcing me to do it, that you are coercing me to do it because of that psychic energy between the two of us. So then they blame, right? That resentment starts to build as it becomes more of a pattern and more solidified. And then there's some kind of often overt blow up where it gets to this point that a lot of your children are at. Those are the reasons why you sent your child to the program. And then there's an impact letter, right? There's a moment of quietness where maybe a recognition, an acknowledgement, or an observation of how much their maladaptive behavior has hurt somebody, and then they have this intense grief and shame. Right? That's the honeymoon phase often. That's in the cycle of violence with domestic violence participants. That's the time after the violence when they buy flowers and give candy and promise to never do it again. And then they don't know how to feel yet, so they repress their anger until it's explosive. And then they explode with violence, and then they are sorry again. And that's the same. This is a more complex version of that cycle of violence that we talk about. So, and then they learn to please. And the way out of the shame cycle is through it. The way out of the shame cycle is learning to feel. The way out of the shame cycle is learning, even in our program, which might sound strange for me to say, I'm not doing this for my parents. I don't want to make them happy. And giving parents tools to talk about it differently. Yes, I was worried that you were doing drugs or cutting on yourself or weren't going to school, because I worry about you. And I don't want you to change because I'm worried about you. I want you to find a source of motivation that's about you having a better life, a more fulfilling and meaningful and rich life. That's why you need to stop doing drugs or being violent or locking yourself in your room. Not because dad or mom are upset, because that's not an enduring source or even a consistent source of motivation, especially on those days when you get angry at them for something they've done or not done. And then your response will be, well, I was doing it for them, so screw them and screw this. So the way out of the shame cycle is through feeling. So things to remember in communication. It's simple, but it's hard. It's not complex. I have been teaching this for 25 years, and I know every part of it, and it's still hard for me. The skill, knowing the skill, being aware of the skill, I can't imagine learning the skill itself more. I can learn about it and the principles surrounding it, but I have the skill down. It's still difficult. Just this weekend, I was having a phone call with my wife on while I was at the conference that I was at, and the practice of active listening that I was trying to practice, reflective listening, took effort. I did it, And she thanked me for it at the end of the phone call, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't effortless on my part. It's deeper than you imagine. I think a superficial preview of these skills does not do it justice. That's why I want to talk about it in depth tonight. No shortcuts or behind the back passes. Um, we want to we want to make it colloquial. We want to step away from the principles. We think we don't need it. It's always like any skill in any area of life. The more you practice the basics, the more capable you are of the behind the back passes. But don't practice behind the back passes right now. Don't. Those will come in the moments that you need them. But the way to develop any sport, any art, any discipline is practicing the basics. And it's good. It feels uncomfortable at first, but it's good to interrupt old habits and patterns. Just the mere introduction and initial practice of the I feel statements and the reflective listening gets you to start thinking differently. Interrupts old unconscious neural pathways to the point where you at least start to ask yourself some questions. At least pause, right? And then this idea of it's simple, it's too simple, it's beneath you. I love to tell the story of Pablo Casals, the greatest cellist, considered the greatest cellist of his time, who died at the age of I think it was 89 or 90 years old, and he died. And the day that he died, he was practicing the scales, and that's a perfect example of I think what often gets in the way for all of us of some kind of self mastery is we get bored with the simple. That's what might be different from some of the greatest achievers in art and in disciplines and in sport is their ability to go out on a putting green and putt 500 6-foot putts. Where for me, I put 3 6-foot putts on the golf on the practice putting range, and then I'm eventually putting a 45-foot putt over the rough because that's more fun and exciting to me, right? So be willing to do the thing, to pay for the thing, to pay the thing that allows you to become more of a master at this. It's okay if you use notes. You don't need to be perfect. And especially in those moments where the emotions are running high, you're going to forget the skill set. And so using notes, especially when you first get with your child and start talking with your child, write down some notes. I remember one time a parent was at a group I was running, and she was sharing some wonderful boundary that she had set with her daughter at the boarding school, where she eventually hung up on her daughter with the suggestion and support of the therapist, hung up with her daughter. And everybody was like, wow, that's amazing. I don't know if I could do that, and wait another week for a phone call. And she said, I've tried it the other way, and it wasn't working, and I was willing to try something different. But then later in the group, this is the funny part. She was telling another story, and she said that she has these 3x5 cards that she sets by her phone. At the time, she's talking about her home line. She sets by her phone, and she pulls them out when she has a conversation with her daughter because they are mantras and reminders and slogans for her to practice or internalize while she's talking to her daughter. And somebody in the group said, wait a second, a minute ago we thought you were the master. And now you have cheat notes by the phone? And she said, that's what allows me to do it, because in my old way, in my old mind, as they sometimes call it, I'm not likely going to react in this new way. This more enlightened, this more flexible, this new way that has much greater range and what psychologists call response flexibility. I'm not going to have that. So I need to stick to it. So practice with notes if you need to in the beginning. And then I would joke at the end of meetings, parenting meetings all the time in the old days, saying, just stick to the format as is for the next 20 years. And then when you get good at it, then you can start going off. But you know what I've learned by myself, and I've been giving this talk now in these webinars for 7 years plus. And what I've learned is the older and more experience I get, the more I go back to the very basic structure of it. I probably have shared a handful of I feel statements, formal I feel statements with my family in the last month. And I've probably heard another handful back at me. And I couldn't have said that 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I still knew the principles, I still knew the tool, the skill, but I'm more likely to use the format these days than I was when I was new to it or even just barely experienced in it. Give it a chance to teach you. This is one of those examples where practicing a new behavior can lead to insight. And most of us want to get some kind of aha moment and then hope that it naturally extends into change in behavior. What that model doesn't account for is the pain and the difficulty and the lack of knowledge or awareness that we have in a moment of intense emotion. So practice the skill, allow it to change you. And then one of the most important principles is this is not a tool, excuse me, not a tool to get you to change your children. I cannot say this with more emphasis except for to say this. If the primary, and it's we're all guilty of it at some level, if the primary goal of you sharing your feelings with your child is to get them to change, you're doing it wrong. It's not okay. We do not want to, ideally, we do not want a parent by telling our child how upset, angry, afraid, anxious we are to get them to change. I mean, we do it. Actually, we do it. But we don't, that's not the ideal that we're striving for. Because if we do that, we're really modeling a lack of differentiation, a lack of recognition of the other, and we're really predisposing our children to peer pressure. They're beginning to learn, and this is going to go with them through all of their relationships, that other people's feelings are their responsibility. Other people's feelings are indications of them needing to change or needing to keep going. Now, there is feedback available to people in the I feel statement. It's there. It can be had. It can be internalized, digested. But it's. I was thinking about it this morning. If you've thrown a baseball, if you pitched a baseball, if you've played tennis, I gravitate toward the sports metaphors, but I'm sure there are others in life. And anyone who's played any of those sports, golf is another great example. And you start to aim it, you start to aim the tennis ball or the baseball or the basketball or the golf ball, what happens? And everybody on this webinar would say, you start to get worse. If you trust your swing, if you trust the hours or hopefully days and weeks of practice, it'll go okay. There's a letting go in a baseball pitch or in a basketball shot or in a tennis swing. There's a letting go to that actually improves its accuracy. So we share our feelings to take a step back, to own it, to get clear about our choice going forward, to get out of our trauma cycle of just reacting. We build response flexibility, but we do not, ideally, want to tell our feelings, especially to our children, but anyone for that matter, with the intent of, if I tell you why I'm upset, you need to change your behavior so that I'm happy again. It's your job to make me happy. And you have hurt me. And you have made me angry. And you're responsible for my feelings, not me. That's not where we're going. So here's the basic 2-slide structure. Not very complicated. Step 1 is I feel. And then you share an emotion. The more basic the emotion, the better. There's some that get off on the fringe, but happy, sad, scared, hurt, excited, worried, angry, frustrated. Just the more you can get to those basic emotions. And when you start getting out into those more heady ones, it can start to look and sound like a thought. If the third word out of your mouth in an I feel statement is the word that, I feel that, you're off track. You're about to share a thought. So I feel sad. I feel happy. I feel hurt. When? That's the second stage. When? And then you describe an event as objectively as you can without interpretation at this point, because you're going to have time for interpretation in just a moment. I feel sad when you raise your voice. Not I feel sad when you're angry at me. It would be I feel sad when you tell me you're angry at me. Right? You're describing it like you're recording it. So I feel emotion when, as objective as you can be to describe the event. And then the third step is I feel this way because I think or I believe. Right? And this is where you have some freedom. I think you don't like me. I think you're trying to get back at me. I think I feel sad when people don't talk to me because I think everybody has to like me for me to be okay. So you're sharing the cognition. And notice in all of this, you're owning it. Nobody's making you. Just simple words like, you make me feel, which is how we often talk. You make me feel. This makes me feel. To I feel it. It is what really ownership is. Just that one word shift changes me, often changes the way that it's heard, and creates a whole different dynamic. So I feel this way When this happens, I feel this way because I think, and here's my thought. After you go through those three, which are kind of the core of it, then you talk about what you can and can't control. What I hope for in the future. What I hope for next time. What I hope for myself that's in my control is I hope I can learn to react to it. I feel scared when I think about you coming home. I feel this way because I don't know for sure. I don't believe for sure that you necessarily kicked your drug habit or done the work that you need to do to be ready not to relapse. What I hope for myself is in the future is that I'll learn to respond in as healthy way as possible. That I won't panic, that I won't get punitive, that I won't let it ruin my life, and that I'll be assertive with my behaviors. So I can't tell you, I've taught this to thousands and thousands of parents over the years. And this, I feel this way, excuse me, I hope for myself in the future, part of it is a huge challenge for a lot of parents. What's my hope for myself in this problem that I'm sharing my feeling about with my child not going to school, being depressed, cutting on herself, not eating well, doing drugs? What do I have control over? And my response is my point exactly. Can you spend a moment, and it's critical and it's important, and it actually changes your life. Can you find a moment to say, you know what? What do I have control over? Most of my life is parents calling me saying, what can I do to change my child? They don't say it that way, but that's most of my life. And when I've done couples therapy, it's what can I do to change my spouse? Those aren't the right questions. I can talk about what you can do that's healthy. I can talk about what you can do that'll change you. And I can talk about the potential impact that can have on somebody. But at the end of the day, it's essential that we remind ourselves and live with the idea, the realization that it's not my job to change anybody. It's their job. Even the most assertive, active parent could know that. I can't change them. I can just be the best parent that I can be. And I have this discussion. I've had this discussion with people today 10 times. I read an article. In fact, somebody sent me an article that I found on Facebook by Richard Paul Evans, where he was going through a tumultuous relationship with his wife for years, almost to the point of divorce. They were miserable. They hated each other. He was on a book tour one time, and yelling at God in the shower for this marriage that he had. And it came to him, and he said, God can't change my wife, but God can change me. And he came home with that awareness and that commitment where he changed. And at first, he was as angry as ever. And eventually, she broke down in tears and opened up her heart. And from that point on in their marriage, he has worked every day on changing him, not her. And it had an amazing melting effect of her armor and her anger. And we can't do it hoping to change them, hoping that it'll melt their armor. We do it because it's the right thing. We do it because nobody else can make us happy. Only us. And then we talk about what we hope for in the future for others that's outside of our control. I've told this story many times that we had some debate about whether or not to include this one in the equation. And the other argument was, why give a platform to ask about somebody else changing? And my response was, just because we don't express it doesn't mean it's not there. If I want you to stop chewing your gum loudly and I don't tell you, what happens? It just melts away and I forget about it and I let go of it? Almost never. I end up getting short and frustrated and finally snapping at you, right? Or in the case of a child, if I don't tell you that I want you to do well in school or get off drugs or eat better or talk to me more, if I don't tell you those things, doesn't mean that my desire for those things isn't going away. I think by putting it so overtly out here and transparently out here, you own it. It's mine. And I try to end my I feel statement after all of this by saying to my child or my wife, you don't have to do anything. This isn't about you. I'm just telling you where in fact, I'm going to talk about this, think on this, focus on this, meditate on this, and then I'm going to walk into the other room for 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day and evening. And I'm going to think, what do I need to do? What's wrong with me? I was talking the other day. I was getting frustrated at everybody this weekend. I was getting frustrated at the taxi cab driver. That was not evidence that the taxi cab driver was crazy or an idiot, even though he got lost twice on the way to where we were going. That has nothing to do with my unhappiness. And so my question on Sunday morning was, so I'm getting angry and frustrated with everybody, short with everybody. What do I need to do? What's my work? What's my work? And I think that by stating it and putting it out there and then taking some space, we can start to change from I'm angry at my child, what do I need to do about that? to I'm angry at my child, what do they need to do about that? And by the way, I'll say this, what I'm describing, I have seen have more positive, long lasting effects on children than any other thing that I know. Meaning, this awareness of it's my work, not your work, for me to be happy and for me to have contentment and peace. And if I keep living my life and modeling for you that other people are responsible for my peace or happiness or sadness or hurt, what are you going to go through life doing also? Most likely following that model and blaming everybody else for everything that you feel, starting with me as your dad or your mom. Reflective listening is less rigid in its structure, but it's simply paraphrasing back the best that you can without sarcasm, without interpretation, without adding in a dig, just paraphrasing back what you heard. And again, not to steer off in another direction, but as I was getting ready for this phone call, I was talking to one of the second nature therapists about a case that they were dealing with, and my response was before I answered was to reflect back and make sure I heard. And what happened after I reflect back? I asked, is that what I'm hearing? And the second nature therapist said, not exactly. Let me give you this other new thing. I said, oh, I didn't hear it that way. Okay, good. Now I know. So here's what I heard you say. And it doesn't have to be to an I feel statement. That one I just shared with you wasn't. But here's what I heard. Before I respond, let me make sure I heard you. And maybe even give you some space, give your sentiments a place of, I don't want to be too dramatic, but a place of honor in this conversation. Did I hear you correctly? Did I miss something? And then they might even change it after they hear it being reflected back, because I've done that all the time. Well, it's not so much that it was this, because hearing it back, even though you reflected accurately what I shared, I realized something was missing from what I said. And then you keep doing that until the person says, yeah, I think you heard me. And then pause. I always say pause for 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months. I don't know how long the pause is, but I know it exists. I know it is a way of non-verbally saying to the other person, that's okay. You feel that way, I hear it. All right, now I have these 4 levels of discussion and dialogue around it that I want to talk about, that I've seen over the years, that are ancillary skills and tools and insights associated with this basic I feel statement. And I kind of ordered them arbitrarily in the order of, I think, complexity and probably when I would want you to start thinking about them. The first one is state the intent of your expression before you express it. I would like to tell you now I feel statement. I don't need you to do anything. I just want you to hear that. Is that okay? And what's cool about stating the intent before you give the I feel statement is that it will tease out your desire to try to change the other person. If you start off with, I'm giving you this I feel statement because, and what comes into your head, I want you to stop smoking pot, then take a step back and say, okay, I was told the other night, don't quite understand it. It seems reasonable that I should be afraid of my son or daughter doing drugs or cutting on themselves or not going to school or being sexually promiscuous. So I should be able to tell my child about that to the intent towards the goal of getting them to stop. But for some reason, Brad Reedy is saying I ought not to do that. So you state the intent and you start to figure out what your intent is. It asks you the question, what's your intent in this? And it frees the other person up, right? Even in those moments, and we almost all want to respond much of the time, right? But we get them to kind of maybe just ask them, can they do that for us? Another thing you can do, and this can happen before, this can happen just after it starts, or this can happen after it was said once or twice or 3 times. Oftentimes I'll use this with my wife if I'm hearing the same I feel message more than once in one conversation. Why are you telling me that? What would you like me to do? Is there something else that you want me to do besides hear it? Because I'd rather talk about that than hear the same thing 4 times. When a child says to a parent, I'm frustrated you're sending me to an aftercare program, once, great. You say it twice, forgivable. You say it 3 times, I think we're off track. I think we're not really talking about what we're talking about anymore. We're not talking about you expressing your feelings and processing them. We're talking about you most likely trying to induce some kind of emotional reaction in your parents so they'll change their decision. And that's not really on the table right now. Doing something new. People say all the time, it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, it feels contrived, feels robotic. And my response is good. Because that old automatic, unconscious, comfortable thing you were doing before, it wasn't working. So It's not for behavior changes. I think I've covered that enough. It helps parents, partners, others to avoid rescuing behaviors, talking them out of it, making them feel better without letting them express or have their emotions, enabling them by providing a soft place to land instead of really learning as we stick to this that sometimes the way that we learn is by pain, by sadness, by hurt, right? We learn a lot about life and ourselves by going through those emotions. And those emotions aren't bad, right? And we can't avoid them and still experience the joy that is associated with those feelings. It promotes differentiation. Differentiation, I'll talk about that little later tonight. It's really another word for healthy detachment, or as I like to say, healthy attachment. Clear connection with healthy autonomy, still present in a relationship. This is where I start and stop, and this is where you start and stop, and we're both here. And there's space and allowance for both of us to be here. And I can hear what you're saying, and I don't hear this about me because then I'm not seeing you. I hear you when you talk. I hear you when you tell me how you feel. I don't hear about me. So I don't have to react except for just to be there, to be present with you. So it promotes differentiation and improves the relationship and intimacy. It doesn't feel 99%, if not more, 99% of the people that I talk to therapeutically, professionally, feel like this is not only uncomfortable and a little bit awkward and contrived, but it actually feels like distance or abandonment or lack of connection. It will feel like that, okay, because all of us have been taught in our family that relationships are like this, right? We talk about this idea of over-attachment or helicopter parent or enabling or rescuing. Those are all just different versions or names for no connection with the appearance of over-connection. But over-connection actually is no connection because over-connection means that parts of one or both selves are being not allowed. If I'm over-connected to you, that means I don't see you, I see parts of myself in you. And the minute and to the extent that I start to do that, you're not present in this relationship. So promotes differentiation, improves the relationship, and hearing and reflecting the "and I feel" statement. This is where you start to talk about, you can call me a jerk. You can, if you're my wife, slam the door as you walk out of the room frustrated with me. And if I'm listening, if I have this filter up and running, if I can engage the top and the frontal part of my brain, I can hear you. And I don't need to defend or rationalize myself. In fact, I probably can even empathize with you. But I can hear the feelings that are unspoken and all the crazy behaviors, the aggressiveness. I was thinking about this also this morning, about this concept that children fail because they're codependent. They fail and reject our values and our emotions. They go contrary. They become rebellious to us because they're actually overreacting to, I can't please you anymore. I can't make you happy. I can't get it right. I can't be what you want me to be. So they just flush it all down the toilet in some reactive response to relieve themselves of the anxiety of codependency. The next series, returning an "I feel" with another "I feel" statement. I'll just say wait. Dueling "I feel" statements is just a skill cloaked way of having an argument. So pause before you give an "I feel" statement. It's not your time. In this article I read by Richard Paul Evans, which you can probably find if you Google Richard Paul Evans and marriage, I think he says, I don't know what it's called, something that we do every day that saves that saved our marriage. Um, um, Part of, I forgot what I was going to say. Part of what he says at one point, he comes home with this idea that he's going to ask his wife every day, what can I do for you? And at first she's sarcastic. The second day she assigns him to do some huge task for her that she knew he didn't have the time for that day, but he did it anyway. And then he was asking her every morning, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? And replacing what was fighting and bitterness and coldness and anger and sarcasm and arguing and yelling, he's replacing it with the statement, what can I do for you? And after some days, she says, with behind tears, I should be asking you, what should I do for you? I've been so cold. I've been so angry. And his response was more important for me than anything in that. He said, you should be asking me what you can do for me, but not today. Because today I'm going to do this. And that's another version of give that part of the conversation to that person and take turns and come back to it. Ask the sender if you can return with a feeling statement after you reflect it. First of all, if you're the one being asked about, can I give you an I feel statement now? I would encourage you to say, not right now, please. In fact, usually what happens with me and my wife is I'll give her an I feel statement or vice versa, and she'll listen or I'll listen most of the time. Sometimes we're horrible at it. And then one of us will ask the other one, can I say something back? Can I share my feelings back? And my response usually is no, not right now. And when she says okay, it takes me about 5 seconds. I'm like, okay, I'm ready now. And it's not a conscious game or manipulation. It's just I needed to have that moment. And when I knew she was willing to give it to me, then okay, I had my turn. You gave it to me. You weren't just thinking the entire time of a rebuttal or a response, but you gave it space. You demonstrated listening, and you gave me space, and so I can hear it now. And sometimes that doesn't come right away. Sometimes it's not 5 seconds. Sometimes it's a few minutes or an hour or longer. But give it its space. Give it its stage. Um, this one is the one that is the pitfall, which is reacting to the I feel statement or clarifying facts. I don't need to go on for this. I'm just telling you it doesn't matter. If you haven't seen the silly video about the husband and the wife, where the wife has a nail in her head and the husband's trying to point that out to her, just Google husband and wife nail in the head. Watch it. It is true. The facts aren't the thing. The facts, clarifying facts are sending the meta message of, let me explain it to you differently. Let me explain it to you the way that I see it. Let me tell you what happened on the way home from work, why I was late this time. Let me tell you why I didn't mean what you think that I meant. So you won't feel what you're feeling. Simple as that. And when parents are working with me and they trust the process, I'll often interrupt them. I'll interrupt them as they begin to explain and clarify. And I'll say, what's your intent? And if they're honest with themselves, and many of them are, almost always they'll say, I don't want her to feel upset. And I said, she knows that. Not consciously, but she knows that you don't want her to feel what she wants to feel. And that's not okay for anybody. She gets to feel it. You get to sit with it. And then it's going to move through her. But when you begin this power struggle with telling people how to feel or what not to feel, you will run into a dead end, a wall every time. Imperatives, exaggeration, or thinking errors, it starts to become easy to infuse or what I call weaponize, because I'm the master of this also. Weaponizing our feeling statements. Add digs and barbs and sarcasm and those kinds of things into there. Exaggerate things. Be wary of those. And on the listening end, I said this to a friend recently who was struggling in his relationship with his wife. I said, she doesn't mean what she's saying, not literally. I mean, at the time, she feels that intensely. But if you can just hear it as anger and sadness, it'll be okay. And give it space. And he did. And they're fine. But it's so clear to me when I watch it from a third party perspective, and so difficult when I'm the one in the dyad to not exaggerate and to not respond to the exaggerations. Exaggerations in my mind are a way of proving to the other person that you have a right to feel this way. If I told you my day, literally, if I showed you the videotape of my day, you might come back and say at me, that wasn't too bad. But if I tell you the teacher was mean to me, the kids were mean to me, the rain was colder than it's ever been, the bus driver yelled at me, and if I can suggest that those facts are actually true, then you might say to me, well, I can see why you're frustrated and having a difficult time this evening. So exaggerations are just these things that we do to justify our feelings, when in reality, we get to feel whatever we feel anytime we feel it. So after giving the I feel statement, ask for a reaction and be open to the response. This is an advanced skill. And if you find yourself after asking the other person, what my wife does this a lot to me. She'll say, what do you think? I want to hear your reaction. And most of the time I never give it on the first request. Many times I don't give it at all in that conversation. But I'll often say, I don't think this is the time. It doesn't matter what I'm thinking. And there's defenses and arguments in my head and wanting to point out where she got a couple of things wrong. I have those. We all have those. And we think that they're the most important thing in the world. But what I'm aware of is It doesn't matter. And sometimes she'll say, "No, I'm ready. I can hear it," and then I'll try to give it. And if it goes well after that, then I know she was ready to hear it. If she comes back with a rebuttal, a counterpoint, then I know she wasn't ready. And that goes along with my children, or with my children for me, or my wife to me, or anybody. Knowing yourself is the core of this the benefit of this skill. I think the intrapersonal benefit of this skill. You start to learn the difference between behavioral reinforcements, rewards, punishments. Right? You start to learn what those are, and you start to separate those out from your emotional response. You start to own your emotions. You start to see yourself clearly. And you start to think, okay, I've said this to the students in the field. I've said this to my children. I'm so angry right now, and I'm going to tell you that I'm angry, but I'm going to walk away because the consequence that I have in my mind doesn't work. It won't be about you and your needs. It'll be about me expressing my anger. So we share our feelings. We feel our feelings. We sort them out so that when we respond to the child or the wife or the whomever, we're responding with more of their needs in mind and more of them in mind than in those moments that we're emotional and reactive. So we start to understand what connection is. That's a different webinar, that's a different discussion, and healthy behavioral reinforcements of our children. And it is a lifetime of work. Okay? Questions are questions and statements are statements. That's a simple comment about meta communication. Just ask yourself, are you really asking for more information? Or are you trying to guilt or shame? You know, like my favorite shaming comment that I have made to my children over the years is, really? That was your thinking. You thought that. Or the time that I've told the story when my son was not treating one of the neighborhood boys who was a little bit challenged well, and I heard about it. And I said, does picking on somebody who's less capable than you make you feel good? And he made the mistake of telling me the truth. He said, yeah, I guess it does kind of. And then I blew up even more. And there was a no, that was a no-win question, right? If he said no, I would have been mad. And then when he said yes, I was mad. So I wasn't really asking for information. And questions, especially why questions. Why questions are so little of the time is a why question really about information. Why are you sending me to aftercare? Why can't I come home? Why can't I call my parents? Why do I have to stay here? Okay? There's no information. You don't answer with authentic, honest information, and the child is like, okay, that makes sense, right? It's an invitation to an argument of reasoning and logic. It's not. So just become more aware of questions. And if you're making a statement that has something in it that's suggesting, I don't know, and combining the two, like, here's what I'm thinking and feeling right now, what is going on for you? Start to be more clear and intentional about making statements and questions. Repeating I feel statements, I already shared this one sort of. One I feel statement on a given topic in a given conversation, or even over the course of time. One I feel statement is fine. Two is forgivable. A lot of them is evidence that something else is going on besides the expression of feelings. Inflammatory content, I've already touched on that. Um, the higher level is empathy. It's not just listening. It's saying to the person. My wife and I were having this discussion this weekend too, where she was sharing something, and I said, "Yeah, I can see that." She's like, "Really? You can see it?" I said, "Yeah. Not only do I hear you, but I actually can relate it to something in my life. It's a little bit different, but I know what that feeling feels like, and I know what that experience is like." Um, be patient. Don't overcorrect. Listen to the spirit of the statement. I think our students and clients can bump up against this one a lot. They start to overteach parents, overcorrect, right? They start to nitpick at them. And there are times in a given session or group session where I will coach somebody about their I feel statement. I do that. And there are times when, even though they've missed all the rules and they're sharing it, I don't interrupt because it's too precious of a moment for them to be feeling and expressing these raw emotions. So they're swearing or they're demonstrating crazy thinking or something else is going on. I just say, thanks for telling me you're mad. Sorry. Sorry, I may have blown it in our last session. Be willing to stop, take a time out, excuse me, sleep on it, or otherwise interrupt. Domestic violence happens because people don't sleep on anger. This advice that is just, it's part of American culture, I think. I've been hearing it for my entire life. Don't go to bed mad. I'll tell you what's worse than going to bed mad, staying awake, angry, and escalating, and getting more and more irrational. Walk away. It feels impossible because it feels like disconnection and abandonment fears come up for all of us. But taking a time out, it's for my wife and I, it's been one of the most important skills that both of us have progressed in over the years. You know, that especially as therapists and our inclination to over talk and over process, just to walk away. And how much more rational people are in 15 minutes or an hour or a day. And a lot of parents and couples will have said to me over the years, yeah, but that's just them running away from it. Well, it might be. And I'm not sure that anything would have been resolved if it would have continued along the way that you're describing it was going. So be willing to incorporate taking time away from discussions as they escalate. And by the way, I used to teach this. If you measure anger on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being rage and 1 being slightly bugged, if you measure 1 to 10, you're not going to want to take a timeout or use I feel statements at an 8, 9, or 10. Okay? You won't. At a 9 or 10 or a 10, forget about it. So taking timeouts has to happen in that 4, 5, 6, 7 range. We actually need to take timeouts before we need timeouts. Right before we need the timeout, and we're unwilling to take it, is when we need to take it. Because once you turn that corner where you don't care anymore, where you're willing to say things, where you're in it for the sake of the fight, you're not going to care about anything I've said tonight. Ownership is a big piece of it. If I come up to you and said, you know, Mike, I felt frustrated when you patted me on the back the other day. I felt this way because my dad used to hit me, and it just reminded me of it. And what I'd like for you to do is ask me before you tap me on, pat me on the back like that. Just ask me before you touch me. What I'd like for myself is I just want to be able to be honest with you, right? That's my thing. You don't have to do anything. You didn't do anything wrong. Now, if you love me and you're my friend, and the request that I'm making of you doesn't sacrifice any of your values or boundaries, and you remember, you're going to say, "Oh, gotcha." But if it's something more personal, or something you don't see eye to eye on, or something you're stuck with, you don't have to do anything about it. Natural or street I feel statements and reflections. This is we talk about this in our program sometimes from the perspective of you can make the language more casual. Yes, I'm okay with that. And when I use it, I might be a little bit more relaxed than the exact words that I use, but this is a slippery slope. Because at this point, most of you, I imagine, unless this has been part of your training for years, most of you don't know when you're editing something out what you're editing out. When I was getting my book edited, I was talking to someone today about this by my publisher, their editor, and another editor that I hired. It was so frustrating when they would take out a story or a principle that they disagreed with, that they didn't know or they didn't like. And I would say, "What did you take that?" Or sometimes they would actually take a statement and reverse its meaning, say it the exact opposite way that I was intending. And they didn't know what they were doing because they're editors. They're great at writing. They're not a psychologist and they're not a parent educator. So editing pieces out of the I feel statement at earlier points of your, if you haven't been practicing this for years, editing them out is a little bit risky, a little bit dangerous. Couple of theories, and then a take home page. Salvador Minuchin, one of the fathers of family therapy, said that boundaries in relationships are on a continuum. He said on this side it's disengaged. You know, these are two people, and on this side he called it enmeshment. And he said somewhere in the middle, he called it clarity or clear boundaries. Right, touching, independent, but connected, moving. Okay. Murray Bowen, also one of the other founders of family therapy, a different school in a different part of the country, described a similar dynamic but differently. And what he said was this: this and this aren't opposites. And we imagine that they are. It looks stylistically like the opposite. But what he said is there's one in the continuum over here at 0. He did it 0 to 100 that he would call low differentiation. And at the other end of the continuum were two parallel but different problems. One was called fusion and one was called cutoff. And he said those are just stylistically different, but they're both the opposite of intimacy. So when parents talk about being over-identified or loving too much, It doesn't work that way. It's not. That's a made up idea. Over identification is cut off. Over identification is a lack of connection or attachment. That's why I say healthy detachment is synonymous with healthy attachment. It's the same exact thing. So low differentiation on this end, fusion and cutoff on this end. And that's where in our families, in our lives, we learn unconsciously about a certain level of proximity. And sometimes it shows up as anger and rage and fighting and conflict, and sometimes it shows up in enabling and enmeshment. But what we've learned is a certain kind of proximity, of internal differentiation, of external differentiation that is problematic, and it is the opposite of intimacy. What's the goal? Ask yourself, what's the goal? What's the goal of communication? It's connection to self and connection to others. Simple as that. Not behavior change, not shame, not requiring somebody else to own and be responsible for your feelings, or vice versa. A lot of parents say this isn't good enough, it's not complete. This won't work. My response is it will work for you if you do it. Eventually, I have found in my life, in almost every case, that people respond to my and to others healthy and assertive communication over time, but not initially. And when a parent gives an "I feel" statement or just reflects an "I still" statement, they'll say, "I can't just do that. They're not going to be satisfied with that." My response is, "They don't have to be. You just get to do it right or not." And if only one person is willing to participate, which is actually often the case, and in my life is often the case, what's the benefit? The benefit is that I'm clear about me. I start to own and know my feelings. I start to know my choice. And I start to demonstrate, communicate in my relationship with you in a way that is not overly attached or overly cut off, that is ultimately connected. Even if connected means I'm going to take space. Learning to listen to what people are not saying, using that adult filter, using that more sophisticated filter. And again, that's going to require you to work through your trauma. Because when we react to people, I don't know if I've said this before, but just to be clear, when we react to people, it's trauma. We're reacting to our trauma. In the moments or as we become more and more grounded, you could do crazy things to me, and my response would be compassion, healthy boundaries, but it would be compassion and understanding. So when I have a knee-jerk reaction one way or the other, running, fight, flight, or freezing, that's my trauma. That is my unprocessed, unevolved, lower functioning brain, meaning the lower levels of my brain, the more fight or flight survival part of my brain, and less cognitively advanced. So my reactiveness is always my problem. And it is evidence that I am not keeping connection and attachment with you. That I'm going into some unconscious, unprocessed history of mine where I'm feeling threatened. Um, what somebody says is not about you. I could say this about 100 ways. They say it in Al Anon. What somebody thinks about me is not my problem. What somebody thinks about you is not about you. What you tell me about the devil tells me more about the devil, tells me more about you than it does about the devil. And in the book, The Four Agreements, they talk about this being one of the agreements that we make with ourselves. And he makes the point that no matter what someone does to you, it's not about you necessarily. There could be feedback in it, but it's important that we start to we grow up a little bit more so that we can see that and hold on to that so we can see our children and see other people. And that's why we all have a long way to go. The last one is listen, listen, listen. And no, you're not doing a good job at this yet. I put that in there. I added that last sentence and I thought, oh, they might get annoyed by that and bugged by that. But I don't know. I almost never see somebody who's fantastic at listening all the time. And I'm really, really well trained in it, really well experienced it, and I still struggle with it. And there are times almost every day where I'm a horrible listener. And probably I'm just more aware of it than most people because I know what it feels like. And I'm actually very, very sensitive to it. And so I know if you're my people, if you can listen to my feelings. If you can't listen to my feelings, and I know that comes up in 100 different versions, and the person almost would never know that they weren't listening to my feelings because they're not trained that way, then I'm going to keep quiet, or I'm going to take some space, or I'm going to say what I'm going to say and let you freak out about it. So just assume that you're not good at listening. Just assume it's a struggle and a challenge, and then you'll be a better listener. And then you'll be more sensitive and aware. And then you give your child the great gift of being a beginner's mind. I listened to a speech this morning by the headmaster at my daughter's school where she was saying parents need to fake it like they get it. And my thought was, that's some of the worst advice I've ever heard. I think what she's saying is, you're good enough. You're good enough. And you don't have to get it right. But she was telling the parents, part of her speech, one of the steps in her speech was fake it. Work behind the scenes, but act like you got it all figured out. My response is much better for you and your children for you to admit that you don't have it all figured out. Because the minute you have it all figured out, you are emotionally and spiritually dead. When evidence can't change you, when new experience can't change you, when new lessons can't change you, when new awarenesses can't change you, you're dead. And I know people like that. I see people where evidence doesn't change them. I see people where progress and differences and exposure to experience doesn't change them, right? They've decided they've figured out all the answers. That's hard to live with, hard to be in a relationship with for any child. We don't have time for question and answer tonight. I knew it might go up against or above the hour because we had so much. I'm happy to take questions or all the ones that Stephanie has gathered and use them in the open forum that we do on Monday. Upcoming parent support groups, February 18th, March 25th at the Bear Center. RSVP to Jen Graham, 49 Jennifer at live.com. I had to cancel this month's, and I'm sorry for the East Coasters. I had to cancel this month's parent support groups in New York and in Philadelphia and in DC. I'm doing, I might be doing, I told you this earlier today, Stephanie. I may be doing DC in March on the 31st. I haven't decided where I'm going to be on March 31st, but I'm going to do one in an East Coast city, and then the second one I'm going to do in New York. We always have great attendance there. For those of you who weren't on the other night, we have a new program opening up this summer, a 28-day adventure therapy program. It's leadership, it's adventure, it's experience, it's lightly therapeutic. We don't even talk about it being therapeutic, although all of the expert and renowned guides that are going to go rappelling and canyoneering and rafting, they happen to have been field guides of ours, so they have that background, but it really is for young adults in the summertime to just get really into the experience of adventure and really get a sense of accomplishment and fun and some leadership. Here are our 12-step support groups. Go to these sites. Go to 6 programs. This is one of the best tools. It's free, so you can't make that a reason not to go. And if you can't walk into a 12-step meeting, it's hard to sit with yourself and ask your child to walk into a therapeutic wilderness program, right? I mean, it's uncomfortable. They don't think they need to be here. It doesn't feel right. These people aren't my people. Please go to 6 meetings while your child is with us at least. That's our bare minimum we're requesting. You can stay connected to us on our social media sites, our YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, blog, and our Amazon book page. If you're going to buy a book related to parenting or psychology, try going to our page. First, it costs the exact same as it does on the main Amazon page, but 10% goes to the charity to help fund people who need treatment who can't afford it. The next session will be Monday the 26th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll start off with all of the questions that were submitted this evening, if there were any, and then you can submit them throughout the week to webinar@drbradreedy.com. All right, that was a lot. Thank you for joining us. Hope it was beneficial. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you Monday. Bye-bye.